so much for being here, including on Zoom. So for the people on Zoom or the person on Zoom, get yourself a marker on a small piece of paper so that you can be writing down your questions as I go, because I really want all of them to come up. I'm not going to be here every day, so don't be afraid. And also, if you find yourself afraid, like, take care of yourself. If you step out, I won't take that as an insult or microaggression or your fragility or what have you. It's fine. I talk about some dark stuff, and I understand if you don't want to be there for all of it. I get it. But I'll take a couple sheets, a couple markers, pass it down, and just make sure that you're writing down not just questions, but concerns, comments, examples about this place or not. But today we're going to be doing Trans 101. It's really introductory. It's just a good way to familiarize yourself with terms, concepts, history, current events, culture, resistance, the good stuff. I hope that it piques your interest and helps you to change other people's minds. So it's not just that I want to turn people from being, you know, a 1 or a 2 in terms of trans solidarity to like a 9 or a 10, but I hope that I can at least impart some skills for you all to take into your work and beyond. So next slide, please. Thanks. So yeah, this is for 6 people who do not want to hurt trans people anymore in your institution. That is a poem. I wrote it. Great. If there are people who are feeling hurt by something that someone else says, I think it is absolutely okay to say it. If you don't want to say it out loud, write it down, slip me a note, let me know. I will stop and we'll take a breather and I can follow you if it comes to that. And I challenge everyone to be brave with this dark stuff. Okay? Okay. Next. Terms and concepts. Great. So, trans. Trans as in moving along, in transit along the gender binary. The gender binary is a hard kept point that many people cling on to for dear life, and it's not even their fault because it's the first thing you learn. Even before you know you're learning, you learn your gender. They have gender reveal parties for fetuses. It is late stage capitalism. I don't know. It's very dark to me to begin the process of acculturating a human being before they can even think or speak. And you impose onto them everything that will be expected of them based on what you imagine their genitalia probably looks like. Everything else is superimposed from you. And that's a choice. And if you make it, I'm not judging, but I'm allowed to say I don't like it. And I don't like it. So that is the basis of the gender binary. Whether you're a boy or a girl, whether you have a penis or a vagina, whether or not you're being acculturated into being a man or a woman. And the adherence to that varies throughout history and throughout the world. So for now, I'll bring it into the United States in 2019 and what that looks like with these weird gender reveal parties. But of course, it's always looked different, and yet the gender binary persists, and it just is different based on where you're going. So if you are trans, you are someone who, luckily or unluckily, depending on where you're from and how you're treated, you are someone who exists along the spectrum and you recognize it, that the two poles that are available for us to move along to do not attract us. So here we are in between, and for some of us it's good, some of us it's not, and it's usually in flux, but here we are. So there are some people who consider themselves to be non-binary, which is a direct rejection of the gender binary. And this is whether or not they are moving along in a transition. I'm going to talk about what that is, or not. So there are some people who identify as trans who will tell you, I am trans. And some of them might say that they even use non-binary pronouns, they, them pronouns, and others, or just their name. Some people just want you to replace a pronoun with their name. And if you want to be decent to them, that's something you would learn how to do. And that is sort of where we're at in 2019. That is where gender politics or transgender politics is moving, and it's moving very rapidly. It's mostly happening with really young people, although there are some people who are not teenagers and on Tumblr who engage in this stuff, even though I think that it's really oversaturated there and leads people to some weird places, but we're not going to get that deep. That's like if you have me back for a 200 level. So the very mantle, the way that we understand trans identity is in flux right now, because there are a lot of young people and others who are saying that they reject traditional transitioning. Transitioning is when you take the reins of your very physiology into your own hands, and you decide that you want to alter something about your body, starting from and including hormone replacement therapy, all the way through plastic and reconstructive surgeries, in order to feel okay in your body. And it varies from person to person, and that has to be okay. It just has to be okay. Like if you call yourself a progressive in 2019, that has to be okay. And that's up for debate. It really is, because there are people who feel like they are part of a larger movement for justice. And if you ask them, they'll tell you, I want freedom for all people. And then they say something like, I'm not down with that expletive shit, right? Like, I'm not with that. And it's like, oh, okay, I need to send some people out into the world who might be able to talk to you, because if you barely think I should exist as myself, you're probably not going to want to hear what I have to say about myself, and you're going to have to hear it from someone who's a little bit more like you, and hopefully they'll be able to help you. That's why I'm here, really. So that's sort of where we're at in 2019 in the United States, in terms of the words that are coming up, the concepts that are coming up that matter to people. And if I'm missing one, if you think about one, if you need more information about one, please write it down on your card so I can come back to it, so I know what I'm missing when I'm doing these sections one by one. So like, help me make this better. Next. Cool. So this is a little dark. The content warning: death, murder, prison, violence. Here we go. So right here in Portland, Oregon, in 2019, 1 week ago, there was a trans person named TT, a homeless black person, who was found hanging in a park in Portland, Oregon, like by their neck. And that is not without its context. It looks like something when a black person is hanging from a tree. And the Portland police decided that it was going to be a 24-hour open and shut case. Suicide, done, nothing to see here, let's move along. Which of course is business as usual, because black trans people typically have no people, particularly poor ones, like ones in poverty. The class dimension cannot be ignored here. TT was homeless and was in a program and was about to get housing, which probably would have saved TT's life, honestly, because housing saves lives. When you allow for people to be homeless on the street and then you call yourself an advanced society, it's like, the most profound contradiction that exists in modern society. That you can have people on a Zoom call. And you can have people who are sleeping on the street. And rather than making it better for them, and this is happening in Portland 2019, you remove flower beds and replace them with boulders to divert people away from places that they may feel comfortable sleeping because they have nowhere to sleep inside. And that is something that Portland Department of Transportation, Portland Police, the City of Portland have come together to decide that this is what's going to happen. So there are flower beds, typically roses, that are sort of out in the summer for people to look at when they're driving by. They're going away. They're being replaced with boulders. And that's to deter people from laying down a tarp and going to sleep. It's to deter people from laying down and going to sleep. It's like to deter people from a basic human need. So TT, just to put it in context, is a Black trans person who is experiencing this kind of profound violence on a daily basis every time that they need to lay down and go to sleep. This is like the context. This is something that might make you want to harm yourself. It might. To feel some alleviation. To like feel like you have some agency over your own body, which is something that is very common in trans people, self-harm, but we're gonna get to that. So that's Portland, Oregon, and within that same 24-hour period last week, another trans person, her name is Leilene Polanco, also Black, Dominican, trans woman, who was my friend 10 years ago when I lived in Brooklyn. And I was in a session for an Afro-Socialist convention in New Orleans, Louisiana. We were in session for prison abolition, tactics and strategies. And I was on my phone, and I probably shouldn't have been on my phone. I definitely shouldn't have been on my phone in session. I'm scrolling and I see that my friend just died in solitary confinement. And of course, there's always debates about whether or not trans people, or anyone really, who their deaths are ruled a suicide. The question has to be asked, okay, they suicided, but is that what killed them? I'm not ready to say that that's what kills people who suicide, especially if you're houseless in a rich city, and especially if you're in solitary confinement and you're incarcerated. If you die in solitary confinement and you're incarcerated, to me there's no question that the institution killed you. The only thing that these institutions profess that they do is to keep people alive. Like, that's your only job. You got one job. Because at this point, I think most prisons and jails have even let down the facade that they actually correct people. You know, like some of them may still hold the moniker correctional facility, but who are we kidding? You're holding people until whenever you feel like releasing them, because recidivism is so high, but we're not talking about recidivism. Or going back to prison by violating your parole, typically. And your parole is what you get when you get out of prison and the judge lets you go from being in your cell or being in bondage, being in formal prison. You're allowed to leave, but you're still on the hook. The state still has every right to intrude on your life and to spy on you and to decide whether or not you should be allowed to remain free, and can put you back in prison if you're a parole officer and or a judge feels like you violated your parole, then you go back to prison. But I digress. So Leilene died in solitary confinement. And it's worth noting that this was at Rikers Island Jail. Rikers Island Jail is not a prison. It's a jail. It's where you go when you're awaiting trial. It is one of the most crowded places in the country because so many people that go to Rikers, here we go to Rikers for crimes of poverty. You steal something, you're doing drugs, you're selling drugs, you're selling sex, you're surviving, You go to Rikers. It costs $500 for nonviolent offenses for you to get out of Rikers while you await trial. If you're doing a crime of poverty, you probably don't have $500. So you stay in Rikers until a judge can see you. There are not enough judges because there's so much criminalization. So you live at Rikers, and often you die at Rikers. Laylene is not the first person to die at Rikers. There are lots of people who died at Rikers. And it raises the question about, well then, what should we do here? There was a movement called Close Rikers Now. You can Google it. They've made some great gains. They've managed to push the city to agree to close Rikers in 10 years. This was last year, so 9 more years. Some of the more militant people in the coalition said, no, we need to close Rikers now because there have already been people who've been dying in custody, and it's because of the institution that they're dying because of the institution. They're not just dying in the institution. The institution is actually killing people directly, not indirectly like when all people die in custody, but directly. They're actually killing people. We know this. This place needs to be closed. They haven't agreed to that because they're not ready to decriminalize. So that means where are you going to put all the people who you're criminalizing? That's how the city makes a lot of its money. They're not ready to let that go. Because God forbid they tax the rich. So we've got people who continue to die. The place isn't going to close for another 9 years. And now we've got this Afro-Latina trans woman sex worker who just died, and people are talking about it, and it's in national headlines. And that's what we're working with now. These are the current events and sort of like where trans people's head is at nationally and locally. So that's what's happening. That's the backdrop. Next, thank you. Okay, trans oppression, here we go. Oh, baby. Okay. If y'all have ever seen with your own eyes, you don't have to give your experience, and you can change names to protect the innocent or guilty. Can someone give me an example of when in their life, and this is multiple people, like if everyone raised their hands, I want to hear from everybody, when you've seen a child have their gender performance corrected by an adult? Can you share it, please? Papa. Mm-hmm.
My mom won't buy my kid like a princessy wand or things like that because she sees him as only male.
Thank you for sharing that. If you have an example, pipe up. Just say it. Mm-hmm.
I had to check my mom yesterday for telling my little boy he was crying like a girl. So, obviously.
Thanks.
I got checked.
Thanks. Yeah.
I've witnessed multiple school disciplinary punishments towards children for not dressing what the adults thought would be the appropriate dress for their assigned gender.
Thank you.
My cousin Nico, oh, dang, I said her name. My little cousin prefers strawberry shortcake and My Little Pony, and so when his birthday was coming up, she asked, what do you want? What kind of party do you want? And he said strawberry shortcake, everything, and so she gave him no party at all. Because she wanted him to have Ninja Turtles and he wasn't interested, so he had no birthday.
Thank you. All right. So I bring this up just so that everyone can hear a little bit about what that looks like when you're young and you don't have agency. You can't even really speak up for yourself. You can't do anything about what adults do to you. You just have things done to you. And I think that this is at the core of trans oppression because so many trans people know that they're trans when they're children. And it's really a disorienting or dysphoric, which is another term. It's when you are experiencing the pushback, whether from someone else or from yourself, from stimulus around you, where you are acutely aware of just how much out of sync you are with others in terms of your gender. It's the anxiety that is brought on by trans oppression, really. So I think that this is when it first shows up for a lot of people, not for all. A lot of people who are trans don't even have the language for what they feel until they get much older. But I think that when it happens when you're a child, it's like it tends to be traumatic, and it's something that you don't forget. And I'm certainly not in favor of new legislation to try to tell parents how to be with their children, because those applications would be funky. And I think that it's better to make social change and to help new parents and old parents, even if your kids are grown, understand what is happening, what other people who are trans are feeling, and how you might show up better for them, especially if you're a parent. So that's not it, of course. Political oppression is different than sort of familial oppression, but they constantly inform one another. And certainly we cannot avoid how poverty and oppression play out. So if you come from a poor family, if you come from a black family, if you come from a family that's being occupied by a settler colony that's terrorizing you, Free Palestine, then you've got a very interesting situation where you've got parents who are really stressed out, parents who are experiencing the ravages of a system, and then they've got this kid who is now, to them, what maybe experiences making trouble. You might or might not be getting calls from a school saying your child is having problems getting along with other boys, getting in a lot of fights, and then you've got to go to the school, and if you've got to take off work and you don't have a lot of money, or you don't have transportation, or you know that the school system is inherently racist and your kid might be getting criminalized on top of being targeted for being trans because they're black, because they're brown, the teacher's white, the administration's white, they don't really like your kid with melanin, and now you've got to go in and you don't know what's what. This is like happening every day, and this is like trans oppression when you're a child. And I just wanted to, again, situate it in a larger sphere of how oppression functions, because all of these things overlap. And I'm not just saying that to show you how intersectional I am, and I am. But it's because we have to always be putting the fight for trans liberation in line with every other fight for human liberation, collective liberation, if we hope to really get anything that will work. So like I said before, I'm not in favor of some legislation to criminalize parents who treat their trans children badly, because guess what? That's gonna really affect children in poverty. That's gonna affect black kids and brown kids and kids living under political oppression way more than some middle-class suburban white kids. They may be getting terrorized by their parents, and they often do, and no one ever knows because none of that is being watched. We just assume that they know what they're doing and they're doing best for their children. And the opposite is true when you live in the hood. Oftentimes people assume that they're all bad parents. They must be. Look how they're living. And of course they leave out the part where they're the ones that are causing them to live like that. But nobody's paying attention to that. Next slide. Okay. Well, now we've got these organizations. Oh, thank God we've got these organizations. So, I'm a protester. Some of you may know me. I scream for my life at protests regularly. And I try to help other people, I'm helping you. I try to help other people be educated, but also to be brave, to fight back, because the system is very scary. The police will kill you if they want to, and they'll probably get away with it, which is like the state can just kill you if they really want to and think they can get away with it. They'll just do it. They've been doing it for a long time. I'm not just like pulling this out of my ass. Like state sanctioned violence is like a fixture of the United States of America. Ugh, don't even get me started. Thanks for not having a flag in this room. Okay, so this is not fixed. In fact, where there is oppression, there will be resistance. So I work with a group called Familia, Queer and Trans Liberation Movement, started and headed by Jenice Eva Gutierrez. And she is famous or infamous, depending on your political orientation, for interrupting a pride celebration at the White House when Obama was in office after they were celebrating marriage equality and the long fight for marriage equality. And Jenny said was there to celebrate with everyone else, but she was also there to call on President Obama to not sort of declare the victory for LGBT rights and here we all are and we're at the crescendo. We've done it. We haven't, because of her friends who were just like her, undocumented and at the border, who were in ICE detention, who were being killed by ICE or killed while in custody. And you gotta watch that. So I can say to you that I think that these institutions are killing people, but it's something that can really hem you up. You can even get like a libel suit if you're insinuating that institutions are killing people. But I think this is a friendly enough crowd. She died while in ICE custody, or they were dying in ICE custody. I'm saying she because there was a killing of a woman named Johanna Medina, who was just killed in ICE custody. There was one just before her. Her name is Roxana Hernandez, and there's a long campaign, Justice for Roxana. She's a Honduran migrant. She died in custody. She was HIV positive because she was a sex worker in Honduras and was exposed to the virus. And in Honduras, you cannot receive treatment for HIV if you're trans. So, generally, it's just like, well, you're just gonna die then. Die. So, she, began to migrate to go somewhere where there's such thing as HIV treatment, and that was the United States, and was seeking asylum. And now we've moved so far to the right that asylum seekers are treated like prisoners, which is not what was intended when asylum became an idea in the international community. Like, that was never the idea, and yet here we are. If you go to the border and you give yourself over and you say, I'm seeking asylum, and they begin to process you, where you go is a prison cell. Okay, so she died in her prison cell because she told the guards that she needed medical attention, that she's HIV positive, that's why she came, it's in her documents. And they let her die. So she went from somewhere where they told her you can die, and came to somewhere where they told her you can die, and she died. And she's gone. So Jenice Gutierrez said, and I'm gonna mock her, and she's okay with this, it's like a thing we do. She said, President Obama! In a room full of hundreds of LGBT organization heads and, nonprofit executives at a nonprofit, they were all there celebrating. Video. Jenny said JENNICET. Immediately shushed by everyone around and then escorted out. And Obama didn't recognize what she said, even though he heard her. Of course he did. She said, what about the trans women that are dying in ICE detention at the border? No response, except shut the fuck up and get out. And that, I think, is really, it's a good snapshot of trans resistance in a contemporary sense. So, oppression against trans people did not start with President Obama. Wow, I mixed them up. If you love Obama, I'm really sorry, I really don't. It did not start with President Trump. President Obama was actively complicit in not just deportations, but in ICE custody deaths at the border of trans people. In this case, it was being brought up to everyone else who should care about this at this big gala, a really fancy party that was a lot of fun. And then everyone who's trying to just have a good time is being made to think about trans women being killed in ICE custody. Like, that's not what they're there for. They're there for a celebration, and you're ruining it. And it raises an important question, like, well then when should this be brought up? When are you listening? And this is like, I think, a good snapshot of trans resistance in the United States right now. Because from that moment, there was a movement that began to build, particularly around the question of racism and anti-trans bias and how they intersect. And Familia is, I think, doing some of the most transformative work to get that done. And it's not just them, because you look at June, we're in Pride Month. There are a lot of demonstrations at Pride events where people are stepping up, and so not just stepping, but rising up. Like, some people can't step, they can't walk. So, like, some people can't step, so they're rising up and saying, well, what about us? And they're hearkening back to the Jenny Sent moment, whether or not they're doing it consciously or not. But this is a big, expensive party every year in every city that does Pride. This is like why we say corporations out of Pride, because corporations give a lot of money to whoever is at the helm of whatever nonprofit in your city. And they say, we can give you $50,000 because we love oh my God, these are the biggest human rights abusers on the planet. And they're like, oh, we love justice. Okay, this is like a nightmare. And the people who are planning these parties, because they're like, really, that's what Pride is, a big party. So they're like, we could really use that money. We could get a great amp. We could get a lot of decorations. We could have a stage. We can set up the grounds for people to come and have a great time. So there's this incentive to bring in a lot of money to show people a good time. And that is at the expense of people like Titi, like Laylene, like Roxana, like Johanna, like Jenny said, like me. Right? Like, people who live in poverty, people who are experiencing racism, the wretched of the earth. It's at their cost. Like, they are being sacrificed on the altar of like rainbow capitalism. Right? Like, we like this. We want this. You don't, but that's not our problem. And that is exactly, precisely how it feels to me. I was set to go on stage at the main Pride Festival this weekend, and I just couldn't do it. I had a panic attack when I saw the line of police that were like guarding the festival, and I was like, I can't do this. Because like, I am like an agitator. Like, I get out there and I'm like in the streets like screaming, and I'm very visible, and that's like a risk that I'm willing to take. But like, what that risk looks like is like Portland Police Department, like, know who I am. Sometimes when I'm just walking on the street, a cop car will slow down and they'll just say, hi, Alyssa. So like, intimidation, so like make me shit my pants and maybe stop what I'm doing. So I just couldn't do it. And I told the person whose name I will protect, but it's Googleable, the head of the person who runs the Pride Festival, I can't do it. I'm sorry. The cops, like, I couldn't bear it. And I told them maybe next year, when there's no police, it's happening. When there's no police, I'll be good to do it and I'll be able to perform on stage. And they just reply back, yeah, we're doing our best. I'm like, okay, all right, well, we'll see. But there's gonna be some trans resistance percolating in 2019 and 20 for June 2020. Like, if I have anything to say about it, if I can help people who are as angry about this to feel powerful and capable, it's gonna be different in 2020. And we'll see. But that's trans resistance. Okay, next. Great. Trans culture. There's this great show that I hope y'all know about. Give it a shot. It's not bad. It's called Pose, Pose. And it prominently features black and brown trans women in the, it's depicting them in the ballroom scene, the house ball scene in 1990. So it's like a period piece. And it is also executive directed by a black trans woman too. So this is not just white people making a lot of money off of black and brown stories. They're making plenty. But one of the people that has a piece is named Janet Mock. And she's written 2 bestsellers about her trans experience and her analysis of her own life and things that inform it. And this is the show. Now, the show is really important, not just because of watching it. So like, it's not important that you watch it and you're invested and you see it, but just that you know that it exists, because some of the actresses on the show have turned out to be quite fiery when they're making their hot takes about the world and about trans politics and racial politics. It's very important because people know who they are now, and they're choosing not to just take the money that they get from the show and enjoy it, which is within their right. Like, I don't think it's okay to like tell people who are oppressed that they must fight back and lead the fight if they're in a like, I don't know. I'm not gonna get into that, but like, you and I have talked about this a little bit before. Like what kind of obligation do you have if you get a little something? Like, are you immediately obligated to turn around and give it back? Or do you want to like build yourself up so that you can serve better? I don't know. Anyway, so there's a couple actresses on the show who are some of the most radical people who are being listened to in politics, and it's really good to see. But the show features people that are from New York City in 1990, who are all black and Latino, who are in the house ball scene. And the house ball scene is created by trans people. There is a long legacy of what were called drag balls in Harlem that just allowed for black drag queens who were being excluded from some of the other drag balls that white queens were having in Midtown and in the Hamptons, and just like white men who had a lot of money, who also like to do drag. They found each other and they started to party together, and they, competed. It's still a thing, drag competitions. But they were segregated because, like, spoilers, like, being oppressed for your sexuality does not erase your anti-blackness or your racism if you're white. In fact, it like sometimes like amplifies it, because if you're persecuted as a white person, as a gay white or a queer white person by straight people of color, then you get to say, and you'll hear this a lot, so you gotta watch it. You'll hear them say, well, I feel like black people treat me worse than white people on the street. This is like a trope, and it's real dangerous, because then you reaffirm what people have already been thinking, and you get to participate in the criminalization of the black body. And it's like, oh, wow. Is that what you want to do with your platform, white gay man? Some of them will tell you, I guess, yeah. So they were excluded from these parties, and they started their own. And that was like the origin of the ball scene. And it was just where you could go to just be seen and feel like you're worth something, anything, by your peers. And that has moved and changed through the decades. and pose shows what it looked like in 1990. And you might be knowing where I'm going when I'm talking about Black and brown trans people in poverty in 1990 in New York City. It shows people who are dying of AIDS. Like, this is real life. This is how a lot of times trans people, particularly trans women, have really dark senses of humor. And if you spend any time with them, you might be a little frightened by some of the things that they say, like sort of like ad hoc, just like about anything, because they like immediately bring up death. And it's like, you're really morbid. I hear that like often, and I'm morbid, and I'm like, I feel the threat of death every day. My contemporaries are dying, and the police do know who I am, and they kill people. So, and that's on top of just like generally just being in the world. So I feel the threat. I feel like it's here. And rather than internalizing it and being quiet, I just want to talk about it and just make other people think about like death as a reality for some people and maybe less so for others. But I think that that's a central component of trans culture that is often not looked at because you don't really want to look at trans people in the first place. And now here they are taking up space and talking about some scary shit. Oh, maybe I don't really like trans people then. And so it goes. And now we're back. Okay. So I hope you wrote down your questions. And if you didn't, you can write them while I'm talking. But I reached the end of my soapboxing. And I want to know if I missed something. If I misspoke, call me out. If I struck a chord, made you think about something, you want to share the thought, do it. Because this is the time. I might not come back. So I'm seeing that the room is already kind of split. I'm sorry to my friend on Zoom here, but this portion, I guess, I don't know, unless someone wants to take the laptop and bring you to their group, I'm gonna split it in two.
Yeah, we can do that.
So I'm gonna take a break and I'm gonna have y'all share with each other some of the stuff that came up for you when I was talking. I'm gonna step out. I'll give y'all 10 minutes. And then if I could be so bold, I'll ask you to share back some of the things that came up that what was shared in terms of the questions, the comments, the concerns, the things that came up that you want to talk about. And I'll come back in 10. I'll set my alarm. I'm going to go outside. Poignant. So be thinking about that while we're going around. You can skip if you have to. Okay. So who's feeling brave?
I'll go.
Thank you.
Because I will forget. I have a forgetful memory. So I'm sharing something that someone else shared that stuck out to me.
Please.
And do we don't share. See, I can't do confidentiality very well. Someone shared something about the homeless crisis and how that is playing a role. This person does work in the homeless community. This person does work in the homeless community.
Okay.
So it was just like brought up, like they're in it. And so just when you were sharing about how
TT.
yeah, TT and how homelessness plays a role in the intersectionality of trans and homelessness and poverty and all of that. It's just it hit home for that person and for me too.
To the left.
I am still thinking about how somebody in my group described, I don't think empathy is the right word, but like a connection to like, oh man, is this how white people feel when we talk about ways that we've been racist and that we are racist and that racism shows up within ourselves, to have to talk about like ways that transphobia shows up either in this person's family or in themselves.
Okay.
Um,
We can come back if you want.
We also had a conversation around the whole police at Pride thing and how, and about that argument that some in the police force use that, you know, that doesn't leave them with anywhere to go. Which, how problematic that argument is though. So that conversation to me was, I have to think about it.
Wait, what was it? That what? Say that again?
So there was, in response to the conversation about the police should
Yeah.
not be at Pride, there was also a response in some sector of the police force, gay, lesbian, bi, trans officers who would say, yeah, and what about us? We are supposed to remain invisible then? And that's problematic, so there was a conversation that I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think one thing that was just starting to come up at the end is kind of like what, outside of the falsely constructed binary of socialization, like what is masculinity and femininity?
Right.
What came up, something that I heard in our group as well, is the police being there. So if the police aren't there, do folks still feel safe? Are folks still protected? And like, what could an alternative be?
Right.
Well, one of the other things that came up that might be 201, 102, 201.
201. You got it.
201.
The academy.
Just
who cares?
like, you know, where privilege moves or fits in when you're moving from transitioning from female to male, kind of the privilege component to that.
Right.
How it shows up. Or not, or complexities.
Yeah, what came up for me was just thinking about like the idea of officers not being at Pride, like who and what would be the obvious alternative, because there needs to be an alternative, but how could we keep folks safe? And yeah, just different ideas around that.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
One thing we spoke a little bit about was when transitioning from female to male, the dangers that entails. You hear a lot about trans women's deaths and violence, but is the violence still the same when you're transitioning from a man?
Great.
Terry.
So, great. Your mic is on. You know how to do this. I'm listening.
Hey, sorry if I'm repeating something someone else said, but I was resonating with someone shared that when you asked examples of being pushed, in or out of the gender binary, that people were sharing examples that they had witnessed, but that this person was like, I could have talked about examples where I did that too, and that resonated with me as ways that I participated in.
Wow. Great. Really great. Is that it?
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Someone mentioned just the different organizations that exist in Portland to support trans folk and the trans movement, and just maybe, going into more detail about those organizations and possibly how we can affiliate ourselves, align ourselves with them.
Great. Okay.
Terry, can you hear?
I can hear most people, not all.
I'll read them back.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, or my interpretation of them back. Okay. Yeah. On this neon pencil, on this white paper. Okay.
One of the things that we brought up is how we can incorporate this into what we do here beyond just having people say pronouns at the beginning of the training.
Great. Okay.
Would you like a pen that's not in the green?
It's too late. Okay.
Change your mind, there's a culture.
Okay. I love that this is the one that I went for, even though it brings me nothing but pain. It's a metaphor for my life. Okay, all right, I'll start from the bottom. Okay, so incorporating some of these ideas here. So, if y'all don't already know this, I hope you do. You know I've been a person who's gone through a mediation here, right? Like, I've done a mediation with someone whose name starts with C. And it went really well. So, like, I'm very happy. And it was with two mediators who I felt like really know what they're doing. And one of the reasons that I feel like they know what they're doing is precisely because white people being the arbiter between black people fighting or having a disagreement is real tricky, I think. And I've gone through a lot of mediations, particularly through like the problems that come along with being trans, because like people don't like me and I don't feel that I should have to move from that place. I feel like I can reject their feelings about me totally, and that causes a lot of problems because I'm supposed to like know my place or something. No. So I've done a lot of mediation with people, and mostly with black people who I'm just with, and then the mediator is white. Every mediator I've ever had has been white. And one of the things that comes up every time, and I'm just like, here we go. It's like, we really need to keep our voices down. If you're experiencing anger, that's okay, but you know, let's think about how you're making the other person feel. Go, then should I even talk at all? Because like I get a little upset and my voice raises and I'm not sure how to be honest without having that be incorporated in how I communicate. It feels like I'm choking on like my own feelings. And it's not good. It's not helpful. It doesn't help with mediating or coming to a resolution, certainly. This time it was different. And I was lucky enough to have black people helping me with my issue with another black person. And it was very different. I would challenge y'all to like be thinking about how you can help trans people who are experiencing problems with people in their communities around trans stuff, and think about how you can prepare yourselves to be able to serve trans community. And that's gonna come from the people themselves. So checking in and asking like, well, how do you think the mediation should go? What should be emphasized, what should be de-emphasized based on, you know, what your needs are. It seems very smart. And actually doing community outreach, which you can get help from, and now we're going up, Orgs and PDX. Trans Unity is the group that puts on every year the Trans March. And they are way underfunded. They have a fiscal sponsor, which is tenuous sometimes when you're a grassroots organization and you want to move and do things, but your fiscal sponsor is sort of like dangling the carrot over your head. And whether or not you're actually going to be able to do that thing you do depends on whether or not your fiscal sponsor says it's okay. So we got some problems, but Trans Unity, I think, is sort of where it's at in terms of who's moving, who's doing, and I can provide you with contacts and initiate a conversation, and then you can take the conversation from there if that's what you want. The person at the helm of Trans Unity is named Lyles McFarland and is a trans woman. So the question of what I heard, and correct me if I'm getting these things wrong, but the question of complicity, where are we sort of coming up short And I feel that for those of us who can make space for others making mistakes, should. Because not all of us can. There are trans people who are like shut-ins that just don't leave the house. I know a lot of them. And they work from home. They get packages in the mail. They get food delivered to their door. And they actually don't leave their homes. And they certainly cannot do what I'm doing now. Not yet, anyway. And they shouldn't have to either. So I think that it's good to dare to share and to be shared with, like to be able to hear it when someone is telling you that they think that your behavior or some act that you did sort of is complicit with social norms that are damaging to trans people. Like, if you can share, and if you can allow someone to share, and it's not an attack on you, and I just want to say that I think this is already happening here, if I may be so bold, and you have like a good model of what it looks like to learn how to be in community with people who are not like you. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but like, if you can manage to figure out how to move through that, because the only way out is through, you know, to use like a tired trope, but it's true. Like, you can't like sidestep your way around anti-blackness. You gotta have to feel it, hear it, and resolve to mend. So a lot of the good trans work that's being done, not just here, but in other places, it's not a surprise that it's like racial justice is at the center, because people of color have been creating models to show white people how to be better to them since colonization. Like, this is what you can do to be better. They've been hearing it for a long time, but like, they don't seem to do it very well on a structural level. But there's some models of how it works in institutions and interpersonally, and I feel like there are some good applications of how that can work its way into the fight for trans justice. The question of like masculinity, F to M, or female to male, transitioning, and sort of like new visions, I think that a lot of trans men are blazing new pathways, which is really interesting. Like, while there are some trans men who I would call bros, trans bros, where they seem to aspire to archetypes that already exist for men, it really messes me up, because what a great opportunity you have to blaze a new trail. And who can blame you if you just want to figure out how to live in the world? It's not optimal. I don't endorse it, but I understand it. And I think taking a little bit of extra care for people who are just trying to navigate, if they aren't directly hurting others, I think it's almost like, all right, let them live and find their path, and, you know, keep your stance. You know, if you're a feminist and you have a strong critique of patriarchy, keep it. And if that person is in your community, keep them too. Like, both can happen. And if they get hurt feelings about it, then let them have hurt feelings about it. I think it's okay to have hurt feelings. I have hurt feelings about everything. I challenge other people to just walk around hurt. Like, dare to feel it rather than try to bury it. So, thank God people talked about cops at Pride, but before I get into that, two people mentioned like alternatives. So there's another organization that Trans Unity works with. It's called Critical Resistance. It was started by Angela Davis like 20 years ago. Angela Davis is, oh my God, she's still alive and still doing incredible work educating people. But I think that like when the history is written, assuming we don't get a fascist takeover and then they delete all the history, might happen. People are gonna remember Angela Davis as being like a extremely pivotal person in like the advancement of human society. Because one of the things that she did 20 years ago and that she continues to do through critical resistance is to call to the floor, particularly the prison industrial complex, starting from the process of creating poverty, criminalization, all the way up to fighting against the death penalty, fighting against new jails and prisons, new methods of surveillance, just like the entire scope from front end to back end of what the prison industrial complex, the entire sort of state apparatus for incarceration and surveillance, like from start to finish, how that functions. And it's been laid out. There's a really good book that they've come out with that I hope is hopeful, called Racial Capitalism, where they lay out some of the foundations. And then generally the prison industrial complex, this is their scholarly work. And they have a chapter in Portland that does really good work. And they have led a coalition that I'm in called Care Not Cops. Care Not Cops. Now, Care Not Cops puts forward community-based solutions to societal problems. And precisely on this question of, well, then how do we keep people safe, is precisely in their wheelhouse. That if you have a lot of people who are dedicated to community safety, your community will likely be safe if people are like buying in, if they feel agency. I'm convinced that this is the way to go. That if people in the queer community who have the capacity to be watchers, so that if something goes down, they know how to spot it, they know how to share that information to like isolate the problem if there is one. People can like swarm and make people safe. So I think that's the answer. I really do. And it's worth noting that over 50% of the budget, oh baby, 50% of the budget that the nonprofit, and I do know the name of the nonprofit, but I'm going to say the nonprofit that runs Pride in Portland, over 50% of their budget for the whole thing went to paying Portland Police Department. So
that's why they need Nike.
Yeah, that's why cops and corporations out of Pride are always together. Don't be fooled and let them, like make it feel like you're over here and you're over here. It's together. So there's that. Yeah, thanks for that. Because like that's exactly it. They won't come if there are no police. Because they know that people hate them.
And they'll pay for it.
Yeah. So here we are, and like and the the less of us, the wretched of us are just like, well then, if you don't want to come, don't come. It's like, I thought this was for us, it ain't for you. So there's that. Then I guess I should have got this. Wow. Oh, and then the uniform for the cops, right? Like, you didn't even say uniform, but that's my answer, is they can come. What are they talking about? You can come like anybody else. Firefighters don't come to Pride in their clothes. Nurses don't. Janitors don't. Why do you feel like you need to come to Pride in your uniform? Because you're more proud of being a cop than you are of being gay or trans, in my opinion. So like, why do you need your uniform? Lots of people wear uniforms to work. They don't wear their work clothes to the parade. So I like that. That's it. Like, I know that there are cops who are there and they're off duty and they're enjoying it like everybody else. Like the entitlement there of like, I want to come as a cop while I'm getting paid. Like, it's like there's something there, and I think that we should be able to be honest about that. Like, don't give them an inch, right? Because if you see on that and you say, oh yeah, well we understand that, then like the cops can just show up and just be like, we're here, we're trying to enjoy ourselves. And then like, but it's the same problem. It's people who are like triggered by the sight of police. And here you are, and you're making people uncomfortable, but you don't care which is like the Trump effect, in my opinion, because it's always been here. But something about this political climate is making reactionaries feel really emboldened. And they're just like, I hate you, and I want you to know it. I want everybody to know it. I hope someone tweets about it so that people who are just like me can comment, and then they can get recruited to fascist organizations, which is happening all the time. Then finally, of course, like homelessness and poverty, like, of course, this is the root of it all, right? Because if you're not granted as part of your package of human rights for like when you're born, for like being a human, if you don't get your basic needs met as a right of being alive, well then it's sort of a race, it's a competition. Can you sell enough of your labor or parlay and steal and rob and kill, pillage, plunder, enslave, colonize, right, all the way up? Can you figure out how to make sure you have a house and food and clothes and education? Like, you have to pay for those things if you want to live in this world. And if you're a person that those things are not readily available to you because people hate you for who you are and how you are, well then you're gonna have a harder time, and we're not gonna be on the hook for your basic needs. And that's like the mantra of the United States, home of the land of the free, home of the brave. I don't think so. It's like, good luck because you're on your own. That seems much more apt for the United States of America. And I think that the fight against poverty is the best way to allow for trans people to begin to thrive, self-organize, and self-emancipate. I don't think that this law or that, while yes, like it can be alleviating, it can remove some obstacles, certainly. I really think that like the way to achieve the vision for trans justice that I have and that a lot of my comrades share is, let's just make sure that we're not putting our lives in danger on a regular basis to work, to earn, to pay for what I think everyone should have as a right of birth. And then if you have that, then you can really start to build out your life and be able to think and feel and create and debate and all of the things that I think like our brains should be priming us to do as like human beings, so that we can like figure out how to keep living. And I think that trans people in particular play a very important role in that, because the gender binary is so deeply held, period, that trans people just show the contradictions in like cis hetero patriarchy, like cisgender on the same side of is cis, right? It just means you don't feel anxiety or dysphoria around your gender. Hetero as in you are engaging in love relationships or whatever with the opposite sex, and therefore you're good. Patriarchy, the domination of men over women, politically, the political domination of men over women. Cis heteropatriarchy. Like I think that trans people just show in real life, in the flesh, what the contradictions of that system produce. That there can be human beings who are living and breathing and bleeding, and that they can be so thoroughly and totally dehumanized that they're just rendered sacrifice people who can just be removed, and that's it. And so I just think that like trans organizing is really important to just show people the limits of what people consider to be their own humanity, like where it stops. that says something about your politics, your worldview. So that's it. Thank you. Y'all are great. Okay. Whoa.